We have some interesting NHL rumors to look at today, including the possibility of Patrice Bergeron heading to the Habs this offseason. Could that actually happen? Could Nick Leddy return to the New York Islanders? Who will the Vegas Golden Knights move to become cap compliant? Could it be a big name like Max Pacioretty? Plus, we also have updates from the NHL playoffs, the Canucks coaching situation, the finalists for the Ted Lindsay Award. Plus, we have a goalie goal in the AHL and prospect signings too. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a ton of NHL news and some rumors to take a look at here today. So let's dive in and get started with some latest updates here from the NHL playoffs. We saw another series wrap up last night with the St. Louis Blues defeating the Minnesota Wild 5-1 to make that series 4-2, and the Wild are done. St. Louis moves on to the next round, where they will have a very tough opponent in the Colorado Avalanche. Now, with the Wild being eliminated, we also have the final details here on the Marc-Andre Fleury trade between Minnesota and Chicago. There was a condition that had to be finalized based on how the Wild did in the playoffs. The condition was that the second-round pick that was traded for Fleury would upgrade to a first-rounder if the Wild made the Western Conference Final and Marc-Andre Fleury had at least 4 wins. Of course, that will not happen, so the second-round pick that Chicago received from Minnesota will indeed remain a second-rounder, will not be upgraded. So I guess from the Minnesota Wild perspective, at least if you're going out in the first round, at least you still have your first-round pick. If you would have went a little further, might have considered it more successful, but the pick would have been gone. Depends on how you look at it. Of course, we saw Cam Talbot go in last night and be the starting goaltender after being out since the late of the regular season. First time in a series he's made an appearance, and obviously it didn't work out so well. So be interesting to see what the Wild do next year. There's some speculation that they'd like to have Fleury back, but that's going to be really, really tough to do. Talbot's under contract for another year. You have to wonder too, like this is just me speculating, but what does Cam Talbot think about all this? You know, he's been the guy there for a little while now, and then all of a sudden you bring in another guy, Marc-Andre Fleury, to be the goalie for the playoffs, and you only get thrown in at the end when the team starts to struggle, and then you're out. You got to wonder what his thoughts are on everything as well, and if his feelings are hurt, or will he want to be back, or whatever. It will be interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, we had 3 other games last night, which all forced Game 7, so Saturday night's going to be a very interesting night. We're going to have the Canes and the Bruins, the Leafs and the Lightning, and the Oilers and the Kings all doing battle for Game 7. So it should be very, very interesting. And in the case of the Maple Leafs, we'll see if they can finally exercise those Game 7 demons and move on to the second round for the first time in, I believe it's 18 years since they won a playoff series. And with this group of young players that are currently with the Leafs, they've never made it past the first round. So they're trying to make progress for the first time and move forward. And like I said, I believe they're 0-8 or 0-9 in their last number of Game 7. So it's something that not only this group of players, but the organization as a whole has to get past. So we'll see if they have the ability to do so. It's going to be a very interesting Saturday night. Of course, tonight we have Pens Rangers go Game 6. See if the Rangers can force Game 7. We did get confirmation that Crosby will be out, and it is a concussion, unfortunately, that he's dealing with, which is really bad news. I mean, he does have a history, in case you don't know. He missed a lot of time, missed over 100 games in his career in the past dealing with concussion issues, so I certainly hope that he is able to recover quickly, and this isn't the last we've seen of him in the NHL. No guarantees. We don't know, have any reason to think that, but you just never know, because concussions can be so unpredictable. Apparently on the Rangers side, Tyler Mott is a possibility to play tonight as well, and we'll see what happens. Florida and Washington go tonight as well. Tom Wilson's still out for Washington. Apparently, Carter Verhaeghe did suffer an injury for Florida in the last game. It is a game-time decision. That was after a 5-point performance. So we'll see how he reacts and if he's able to play. And, of course, the Flames and Stars go tonight as well. The Flames trying to wrap things up, and the Stars trying to force a Game 7. Now, we also got confirmation today that the Vancouver Canucks are going to have Bruce Boudreau back as their head coach next season. The Canucks just confirmed this on Twitter shortly before I hit the record button here. So that's something we were expecting after recent comments from Boudreau saying that he was expecting to be back. There was just a couple little details to be worked out. So it'll be a 1-year contract from what we're understanding. It's an option that was activated, and he'll be eligible for an extension pretty well any time now, but it doesn't sound like the Canucks that he will actually discuss it until the end of the season. So we'll see how things go. I'm sure the Canucks players and fan base are happy to see Boudreau return after the success they had after the coaching change earlier this past season. Of course, we also got confirmation from the NHL today on the Ted Lindsay Award finalists, which is basically, the top player voted on by the players. Your finalists are Roman Josi, Austin Matthews, and Connor McDavid. So we'll see who wins that award. Tough to say what direction the votes go, but those are your top 3 finalists. All 3 had a phenomenal year. We also saw a goalie goal last night, not in the NHL, but in the American Hockey League playoffs for Joel Hofer, the St. Louis Blues prospect, from behind his own goal line, behind his net, really ripped that puck down the ice and scored a goalie goal. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure between Twitter or YouTube, if you Google it, Joel Hofer, goalie goal in the American Hockey League last night, you probably will be able to find it easy enough. It's been making its rounds. So obviously, I know he's probably the next young goalie to really have a shot at making the Blues roster at some point here. Of course, we'll see what happens with their tandem with Binnington and Husso. Husso is an unrestricted free agent this year. I imagine there's interest to keep him in St. Louis, but might be challenging depending on contract negotiation. So Hofer will likely make the NHL here at some point, but hard to say exactly when that might be. And of course, we have some prospect signings today as well. The New Jersey Devils have signed defensive prospect from Finland, Topias Velinen, who's a 2021 5th-round selection, played this past year in Liga, 19 years old. And the Maple Leafs have signed a couple of key Finnish prospects as well, both from the 2020 NHL draft. They have defenseman Tappi Niemela, who put up 32 points in 48 games in Liga this past year, was a 3rd-round pick in 2020, and center iceman Ronnie Hermonen, who's a smaller Finnish player, 5'9", 165, but quite an exciting player to watch. He was a 2nd-rounder in 2020. Both players played in Liga this past year. A couple of key prospects in the Leaf system. So obviously, key players to get under contract for their 3-year entry-level contracts that'll kick in next season. Now, we got word today as well, the Montreal Canadiens have hired Christopher Boucher. Might be a name you don't really overly familiar with. He's been working most recently for the San Jose Sharks in their scouting department, but he's formerly worked with Sports Logic in the analytics world, and he's been hired to be the Habs' first ever director of analytics, the first person to ever hold that title with the Montreal Canadiens. So Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton are certainly expanding the amount of people working for the organization and taking a new department basically into a new direction here for Montreal. Nice to see them embrace that. There's lots of information that can be obtained from analytics. It's not the end-all be-all to everything, but it's a very useful tool and all kinds of information that teams can gather. So it's certainly nice to see them do that. And speaking of Montreal, there was a very interesting conversation last night that took place on NBC Sports Boston, talking about Bruins captain Patrice Bergeron. Now, of course, we know that Patrice Bergeron is a pending unrestricted free agent, and we don't know what the future holds for the longtime Bruins captain. Of course, he's, approaching his later 30s now. Will he continue to play? Will it be in Boston? Will it be elsewhere? Lots of questions surrounding this. There's a lot of people that seem to be having the way of thinking that Patrice Bergeron is more than likely going to retire. That seems to be probably the thing I've heard the most when people within the hockey world, reporters, and anybody with any kind of intel at all seems to be leaning towards. If they had to make a prediction, we've seen a lot of NHL players who have kind of been in a similar boat, especially in the Bruins organization too. Obviously end up not coming back. There's no contract talks. We know that the Bruins and Bergeron both want to put it off to the end of the season. But last night on NBC Sports Boston, having this discussion, Tony Amonte, of course, a longtime NHL player, I'm sure he's very well connected in the hockey world and in the Boston area, has reason to believe, based on what he's saying, that he's hearing rumblings about Patrice Bergeron going to join his former agent and now GM of the Habs, Kent Hughes, in Montreal. He said, now I'm not sure this is accurate, but he said that Bergeron grew up, obviously, which we do know, in the province of Quebec, and grew up, cheering for Montreal. Of course, this is not the first time that topic has been brought up. As soon as Kent Hughes became GM of the Habs, a lot of people connected the dots and said, okay, look at his client list. Patrice Bergeron, Chris Letang, a couple of very prominent, long-time successful NHL players that coincidentally have expiring contracts this year and will likely be UFAs and could possibly leave their long-time teams. Would they go to Montreal? Well, to be honest, does it really make sense for a team that's rebuilding to go into the free agent world and to bring in an older veteran like that. You could argue that maybe it doesn't, but at the same time, you have to say during a rebuild, you can say that you need some veteran players that can really teach those young guys a lot when it comes to being a pro and winning and getting all the right habits and the right way to play. 200-foot game. Bergeron would be a tremendous mentor for Nick Suzuki. And if you know what, even if he only played there for a year and had that option to mentor the young centerman, that could be huge. I mean, it depends on what he's willing to take for a contract, for money and all that. Because it's not like they don't have other veteran guys. But we don't know how many of those other veteran guys are going to exit Montreal. How many trades will we see? It's difficult to say, right? So to me, I'm not completely sold on the idea that it makes a lot of sense. But coming from a connected former NHLer like Tony Amonte, it's at least something that we should discuss and think. From your perspective, especially if you're a fan of either the Bruins or the Habs, I mean, for one, to cross teams would be quite weird, especially on, it's not like you're traded. This is a free agent signing. I'm sure Bruins fans would not take to this very well, but, does it make sense for Boston to not push to get him back? And does it make sense for the Habs to bring him in on a short-term UFA contract? I'm not completely sold that it happens. We don't know if Bergeron wants to continue playing, but it's certainly something that, like I said, we need to monitor and see, and let me know what your thoughts are based on the comments here of Tony Amonte. Now, does it make sense for the New York Islanders to bring back Nick Leddy as an unrestricted free agent this offseason? I read an article just a short time ago from James Nichols of Eyes on Isles, and he seems to think it does. And really, if you look at it, really ever since Leddy was traded from the Islanders, they've had a hole on the left side of their blue line. They could use a partner for Noah Dobson. That should probably be one of their top priorities this offseason. And Nick Leddy is a guy who's, didn't have the greatest year in Detroit, but since he's been traded in a more competitive team in St. Louis, he's actually played pretty well. He's done a really good job there, and I think he's going to open some eyes that, this guy can still play. He's still a great skater. He can still move the puck, and that's something that the Islanders desperately need. They went from having Nick Leddy have this to having to use a lot more of Zdeno Chara and Andy Green, who are way older and just not capable of getting that job done. And that was a big problem for their blue line this year. As I mentioned before, the Islanders to me have really two big holes. A left shot defenseman who can move the puck and skate well. Ideally, somebody younger than Leddy, mind you. So, we'll see what else they look at. And on top of that, a scorer in the top six who can play with Barzal. That's their two big priorities this year, in my opinion. Now, I think they will likely explore a trade for a younger, more dynamic defenseman. But if the prices are too high and things are just not working out in that regard, I could see them exploring this. I mean, Leddy's obviously very familiar with the team, with the area. I don't know if he still has a home there or not. Obviously, he was there for quite a while. Probably does. So would they get him signed for a cheap enough contract, even if it's only a couple years? Like, it might be worth their while doing it. Like, this does make some sense here. If they could go into free agency, not have to give up a bunch of assets, and he can be hopefully a placeholder, even just for a couple years, while they either can find another younger replacement for him. It might be a good way to go so that they're not breaking the bank, because they don't exactly have a ton of interesting prospects that other teams would want to trade for and give you a top young defenseman like a Jacob Chychrun. I think they have interest in Chychrun. I think they will try and explore that. It's going to be tough, though. They're not going to have the assets like some other teams do to pull that off. So let me know what your thoughts are on Leddy returning to Long Island to be the left shot defenseman that they're looking for, maybe even the partner of Noah Dobson possibly. He could also partner up with Mayfield. That also would make sense too. They would work well together as well. Either way, it adds a skating defenseman, good skating defenseman on your top four who can move the puck and be pretty responsible back there. And lastly, I want to look at an article in The Athletic from Vegas Golden Knight reporter Jesse Granger, looking at who stays and who goes because of the impending major cap hit that the Vegas Golden Knights are facing here. We know that they're way over the cap and relied heavily on LTIR to become compliant this year, and now they're not going to have a choice but to shed some salary. This article is quite lengthy and looks at the whole roster in a whole, but I'm going to kind of summarize here a little bit and look at a couple of names he pegged as the most likely trade targets. He starts this segment of the article with Robin Lehner, talking about the relationship. Is there friction there? And everything. And he said that Leonard, out of all the players he names, is probably the least likely to be moved. But it, does it acknowledge the fact that it's a possibility, and that could very well be, regarded by the relationship and everything, and how things were treated and handled here as the season went on, with Coach Peter DeBoer and Robert Leonard seemed to be not having some, things to say about each other that were overly nice. And of course, Max Pacioretty is another very interesting name on this list. Obviously goes on to say that he's a great scorer, but he can't stay healthy, and moving of Pacioretty's contract would give the team an extreme amount of flexibility, which would go a long way. Because at this point, if they don't want to do anything trade-wise, and they want to say, well, all of our RFAs and UFAs can just walk, they still wouldn't be cap compliant. So they need to do more than that too. Like, they need significant money moved out. So Pacioretty, to me, is a very interesting guy. Now, I think he would certainly have a decent amount of value, but not as much as if he was playing full seasons and was healthy all the time. So that's a very interesting one. It would certainly take away from their top line. They haven't really had a chance to see Stone, Pacioretty, and Eichel play together, so I don't know what they want to do in that regard. Alex Martinez is another defenseman brought up here. Of course, he missed most of this year in LTIR. He makes more money than Shea Theodore, and Theodore is a guy, to me, if I'm other teams, like they're looking for a young, ideally a younger defenseman, I would target Theodore big time, whether I'm like the Senators, the Islanders, like the Sabres, any of those guys that want to have a solid young defenseman addition. Like, I would contact Vegas about Theodore and see if you could pry him out of there. But Martinez would probably be the preferred player to trade on the back end. And it also talks about William Karlsson. They used to call him Wild Bill early on, scored 40 goals, had a breakthrough season, and it's been a steady decline since. I sometimes, tease the Golden Knights fans, say he went from Wild Bill to being Mild Bill. Like, he went from 40 goals in their inaugural year down to 12 goals last year. He still has a long-term deal at $5.9 million. It's just not working out. And they have younger players that are, below him, like a Nick Waugh, who can do the same kind of job and make far less money. So, but again, that's not easy to contract to move. So, they want to bring back Riley Smith. There appears to be interest in that. They all really like him and what he brings on and off the ice. But to have a chance to bring back Riley Smith on top of the other players that are already under contract is going to be super, super tough. Probably one, if not two of these players likely have to get moved. And there could be others too, but these are the most likely ones according to Jesse Granger. So which ones do you think have the most value? Where would be a good fit for them? What kind of return are we looking at? It would have to be something future-based with picks and prospects. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll discuss further on the Vegas Golden Knights, as well as Bergeron to Montreal, Leddy to the Islanders. What do you think about all these possibilities? We'll discuss in the comments. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.